And we're starting with an interesting map. This is a map that comes from, well, we'll get into specifically, but this is the map that came from this survey. Specifically, I have a copy here, which is a survey that was put together, a comprehensive plan for the Wausau area in 1965. And yeah, it basically gives an overview of what the plan for the, sorry, there's I think a fire alarm being tested right now. I don't know if it's coming across, I apologize. A little distracting. Anyway, no, one traffic, that's what we're talking about today, right? One-way streets. In a way, this book sort of sets the stage for why we have so many one-ways in Wausau, which is a thing that's really interesting. I think many people who, whether you're here your entire life or you move here or just driving through the city of Wausau, you have to wonder, why do we have so many one-way streets? And honestly, I'm not entirely sure whether the number of streets that we have are more than a city roughly the same size as Wausau. However, they certainly seem to be pretty prominent. So understanding this, we have to talk about the automobile and the arrival of that as a thing. So the automobile starts around the turn of the century. People start to be, this new technology. By the 19-teens, we see more and more people embracing this technology and using automobiles to get around. And that's going to create some problems because the city streets and the way that people get around, we're not used to using these. And these are a little different than using like a horse-drawn vehicle, right? Or walking, which is the other way of getting around. As a result, as more and more people in the course of the 19-teens, into the 20s and the 30s, there's going to be a lot more people driving around on their streets. And so we're going to need to accommodate to make it safe, right? These early automobiles maybe didn't have, I mean, certainly not like safety belts or safety glass, right? These sort of modern things that we kind of just expect as a base. Turn signals, things like that. It's not as developed as it's going to become. So especially larger communities, this is just talking about Detroit, have to start to make some changes to clarify how people should be driving around, and also some infrastructural things like here they are talking about painting lines to beat the traffic jams. So putting lines that designate which side of the street you're on in different lanes, like that could be helpful, right? And there's a lot of these things that end up popping up. Some of them are adapted from other things, some like railroad and other means of familiar transportation. Some are going to have to be figured out as we go. So this is in Wausau. I just like this. You can see the sign here. This is indicating they used to mark the state trunk system with these triangles with the W. So this is saying, hey, we're on Highway 52. And they just painted it right on a utility pole. By the end of the 1920s into the 30s, the state goes starts creating a lot of roads connecting communities all across Wisconsin. And certainly there are communities within Wisconsin, within the city, we have roads being built and people driving their cars on it. So things like signage. What street are you on? There are people that are maybe like, this becomes increasingly important because there are people that might be in town that have never been here before. So being able to follow a map and figure out where you're going is important. So yeah, and by the 1920s, Wausau's having to deal with this. I love this article. Basically, it's talking about how, it just opens up here with the words, the police are fearful that it is going to be necessary to hail some automobile drivers into court to give them a proper respect for the arterial highway regulations, which is just a really interesting way of saying we're going to have to start pulling people over. Hey, excuse me, can you recording something? Yep. Like I said, we're doing some changes in here, so sorry about that. It's just something interesting to say, like, yeah, we're going to have to start pulling people over. It's just kind of an understated way of saying, we're awfully sorry, but we might have to start doing that. It's kind of funny. But what are they talking about here? What is the arterial highway regulation? by the 1920s, we start to really think about how cars travel should work. And one of the philosophies that comes to pass is something that it's articulated here kind of nicely in this book by Miller McClintock, or paper. I think it's a book from 1925. And this is in a section about speed limits. Again, this is a concept that maybe you don't have to worry about. The cars have odometers, and so we can actually, or not odometers, speed indicators, odometers. But you can tell how fast people are going, and so we need to kind of, keep that safe. But here they're talking about specifically the use of what they're calling boulevard stop or arterial highway regulation. And basically the idea here, which apparently it's becoming quite general in American cities, is to have protected thoroughfares that have the ability to pass traffic safely at relatively high speeds. So in general, we want to create a speed limit so that people aren't going too fast in every places. But if we can funnel the traffic into particularly few lanes, these arteries, that can pump that traffic into maybe bigger streets that are better equipped for traffic to go faster. And by doing this, there's a couple ways that you can do this. For example, here we are on 3rd and Stewart Avenue in the corner there. You can see that the trolley lines are still in place. This is from the 1930s. You see a lot of things happening, right? As more and more people are driving cars, there's infrastructure like, filling stations, service stations popping up. But also note that there is a stop sign here. It's strange. I have been looking over the last week at different photographs of old street scenes to kind of get a sense of what's going on. I never really looked for stop signs. They don't always have stop signs. Many cross streets that just kind of like, yeah, just don't drive into traffic on Grand Avenue. They don't put a stop sign at every, but by the 1930s, we start to see more and more of this. By creating stop signs, you can limit the cross traffic and give right of ways on streets that you want to promote people traveling on, like, for example, Stewart Avenue or 3rd Avenue or whatever major street you want to do. Sometimes, though, those major streets are going to meet, right? This is 3rd and Scott Streets in downtown Wausau. One of the other innovations that comes up around this period is the traffic light. Now, I think this might be the location for the first traffic light for the city of Wausau. I could be wrong about that, but as far as I can find in the records, this is the first one that's talked about. There's going to be others that pop up. It's not nearly as widespread as it's going to become, obviously, but there's a couple intersections where it just is necessary to kind of direct traffic. So, for example, this is an article from 1930 talking about how they're going to put a new traffic signal light. And this is going to take some getting used to. There's a little bit of pushback. People are saying having to stop and wait. Like, it's kind of frustrating today when you pull up an intersection, you get a red light, and there's no cross traffic, and you just got to sit there for 30 seconds or whatever. This is new to them. So there's people like, why are we doing this? Ultimately, though, the benefit of directing traffic and stopping people hitting each other and making it clearer where you're supposed to go, that's a good thing. And so that's what happens. This picture is taken about 1949, and we know that, just as an interesting little aside, traffic aside here, we know this because you can see the parking meters on the side of the street. Those were introduced in 1948. Which is kind of interesting. I don't know if they had, this is the first metered parking. By the 1940s, there are a lot of people who are even more than in the 20s and 30s. After World War II, we have the boom of the post-war years. Many people are driving automobiles from all around. We have new neighborhoods popping up. We have people driving further away to do their shopping in downtown Wausau. There's a lot more cars on the streets. And so they need to park. And if we can figure out a way to effectively, again, push the parking to not just be anywhere, but like in designated areas, then we can kind of control where people are going. And also maybe make some revenue for the city to help pay for like things like traffic improvements. And so here on the left, they're talking just arrival of the traffic meters, parking meters, which apparently came from an airplane, so from the sky. On the right, this is just kind of interesting. On the right side here, nope, down there. On the right side of that picture of the two men is the police chief, Everett Gleason. On the left is a guy named Irving Hall, or not Irving, L.H. Hall. Irving's father. Alich Hall was one of the first automobile dealers in 1906. He started his auto dealership selling Ford Tin Lizzies. And yeah, the Hall garage is a big place up through the 1970s, not under Louis. But they decided to take this. It's a great picture of him putting, as somebody who helped to popularize the thing that's causing the problem, traffic and parking issues. He's helping to get the solution by being one of the first people to put a coin into the machine. 1948 is an interesting period, right? Because parking is a big problem. There's also a lot of other stuff that's happening. Despite stop signs, despite traffic lights, despite more people being on the road having to get get a license and all of that, there are still plenty of accidents. This one is a good not a great story. Apparently, somebody borrowed the company truck and got into a wreck. I think they survived this one. There's also a lot of incidences, and I was going through the scrapbooks of all of the municipal events that happened. There's a lot of automobile accidents that end in fatalities. A lot of people die because of automobiles, because they crash their car, because they get their car crashed into another car, or because they just happen to be walking in the wrong place at the wrong time. We have car crashes that people die in today, but and it's hard to know. I don't actually have a good sense of quantity-wise whether there are more deaths to traffic accidents in the 40s than there are today, but I'm pretty sure that there were. It's crazy the number of accidents, and this is a real problem. And before, in 1948, they're talking about drunk driving and how can we kind of, reduce that and make it safer. They're talking about, there were some instances where, after a car crash, they took the keys away from the, 79-year-old, person who maybe isn't capable of driving, 80, whatever. There are young people getting into accidents doing stupid stuff. But there's also, in 1948, the Marathon County Sheriff dies in a fire, or in a traffic accident, what they call here a highway mishap. I didn't know about this, but yeah, apparently he's 47. This is not a drunk driver. This is not somebody who is being reckless. This is the sheriff, and this is a problem, right? We need to figure out if we can make this safer. And so there's a lot of energy that's going into, in 1948 in particular, trying to figure stuff out. So in 1948, they did a bunch of surveys, traffic surveys. This is the big one that gets funded, which takes place over 1948 and finishes in 1949, I think. But this traffic survey is not looking at where should we have parking, where should we have metered parking, or whether we need a light here. It's talking just in general. Some folks go down to Kankakee, Illinois, which is apparently about the same size as Wausau. It has similar issues with a river that runs through it that creates bottlenecks at bridges. And they apparently had an outside company come in and do a survey, and they were able to use that survey to make good changes to help, make things safer in their city and make traffic be less of an issue. And so they decided to do it here. So they use a good number of the amount of money from the meter that they put in place, and they fund a survey. Just kind of interestingly, how did they go about doing a survey in 1948? Well, apparently, what they did is they waited at important places like the bridges, and they stopped every car over the course of that day that tried to pass and asked them, where are you coming from and where are you going? And then they counted that up, and that gave enough data that they could, then extrapolate larger trends. But I just, got a feel for these people. The scene was on the Memorial Bridge. It was no easy task for the pollsters, standing in the broiling sun with the heat bouncing from the pavement. But they got through it, and ultimately, they were able to use that funding. Now, I will say, I didn't find a great newspaper article, and I don't actually have the results of the survey. It was pretty quick to actually go through the process to get the survey done. It takes a little bit longer. It's like 1950, 51 before they're actually having that and having suggestions for policy, right? One of the policies is to create some one-way streets. And so they do. So specifically here, we're talking about, it's not all the one-ways that we have today. Specifically, they're really looking at getting over the bridge. That's the real bottleneck, right? The population of Wausau, by the way, in 1948, I found a statistic that said that it went up about a little over 1,000 people in 1948. And there was just about 29,000 people in the city, in the metro area. So that's a pretty large growth. The city is growing, and many of those people are driving automobiles, and getting east-west is a real problem. So what they decide to do is, arterial traffic, right? If we're using the metaphor of blood being pumping, like you're outside on a very cold day and your fingers get numb, so you start to, work them a little bit to get blood flow back. Your heart is pumping that blood there. It's not just kind of like pushing it as, like you're just dumping a bunch of water on the floor and just kind of, and it fills to the end of the space. It's being pushed along the arteries, right? And those arteries don't go two-way traffic. There's an artery going out, and then there's a vein, a tube coming back. And so that was kind of the philosophy here. This also helps because a one-way street means that you don't have to stop as people are trying to turn left. So you don't have to go through traffic. You just make it a streamlined one way. So here they're specifically talking about basically creating one ways, and this splits. If we look at, let's see here, this is a Sanborn map from 1954, essentially. Basically, what they're doing is they're taking this and they're splitting this up into one-way traffic, like we have today, going this way, and then kind of splitting it up so that especially on the bridges, you don't have to deal with two lanes of traffic. I guess they still would have had to have it here, but it's basically they're making it so that the entry or the approaches to the bridge in downtown Wausau are going to be kind of separated, and then make that traffic a little bit simpler. That's the idea, at least. It's not without pushback, but they decide to expand it a little bit. So they add a couple more. Again, it's not the larger thing, but there is pushback, right? And ultimately, the city says, hey, let's just give this a fair shot, and people get used to it. It's kind of like, traffic circles or roundabouts. And not having to stop at a stoplight and just kind of doing that. It actually does make things go quicker, traffic move a little quicker. But in order for it to work, people have to know what they're doing and be confident and not have, so it takes a little bit for people to get used to, but it seems like it kind of sticks. I think it's really interesting here. So this is the Wausau edition, special Wausau edition of the Wisconsin Magazine. Basically, this was a whole issue dedicated to the city of Wausau and the surrounding area, and all of the great stuff. It's basically like a PR sort of marketing opportunity, and they treated it as such. In the introduction, though, they talk about, the city is growing and what makes it great, right? So they write about this saying, it was once strictly a backwoods lumber community. The city has reached maturity in the past decade or two, not only as an industrial center, but it is also the county seat of Marathon County, which they throw in here as the largest land area in the state, which is true. The march forward has been like the cadence of a military platoon, the footsteps of those business, industry, population, education, and cultural activities, plus other phases of community development. Widespread diversification of industry has been the most significant change, making the community's economic well-being no longer solely dependent on wood and wood products, which is kind of like an early articulation of sort of the larger mythos of Wausau's development. We go from being a lumber town to a manufacturing, the Wausau Group and all that fun stuff. In here, though, they're talking about transportation a lot, right? They talk about the Alexander Municipal Airport being a big deal, dealing with parking. That's something that we're tackling. In here, they also say, besides parking, for the future, the city has studied the traffic plan, the days ahead, when more and more residents of the community will be driving more and more automobiles. The traffic survey was completed in 1949, and some of the recommendations, notably the establishment of one-way street patterns across the Wisconsin River in the downtown area, have already been put into practice. I just think it's interesting, right? In 1953, they're talking up the one-way streets. This is not, just a boring municipal sort of thing to make things safer and to make traffic flow better. This is a sign of the progress of the city of Wausau. Look at us investing in making decisions that are going to benefit the larger community and our future. Jumping ahead to 1965, it's really interesting because more and more communities in Wisconsin are also considering doing one-way streets. And Wausau gets to kind of sit back. This is from the Daily Herald. The editors are kind of like, yeah, that's great. We've been doing this for a decade already, right? We're ahead of the game. Look at us. We're so progressive. We're so ahead of the game. Just kind of interesting to see that. This is also maybe paving the way for some further changes in 1965, right? Gets back to this, which is the comprehensive plan for the Wausau area. So let's get back. I know I started with this, and I'm most of the way through the program here, but let's get back to this particular book and the maps that we're talking about. This was a survey that was done. Again, outsiders brought in to sort of do an overview. This is not just the city of Wausau. This is a wider committee made up of people from towns of Stettin, Maine, Rib Mountain, Texas, the town of Wausau, town of Weston, city of Schofield, and the city of Wausau. So all these people are like, hey, we have a vested interest, the wider Wausau area. We're not sort of, hey, we're here in Weston, this is our area. We're all kind of in this together, and traffic is something we all have to deal with, as well as a lot of other things. I love this because it has a whole bunch of just really interesting maps. Maps that are hard to find a use to talk about. The traffic flow map, we'll talk more about that one, but like plan for public school sites, this is kind of interesting. The goal of this is not necessarily to make changes, it's to give advice on how to make changes. Some of that advice gets carried out, some of it does not. The plan for public schools is a great example of this, right? Nope. So if we kind of zoom in here, they are suggesting to abandon a elementary school, making some new and some enlarging some, but also to enlarge the senior high school, right? The senior high school, it is 1964 at this point. There's a lot of young kids that are coming, going to be early teens, they're on the horizon. The baby boom is going to lead to a need for a larger institution. So they say, start buying up the surrounding area and expand the high school. And ultimately, this is an example of one thing where, by the time the end of the 1960s, they decide to go a different direction and they build a high school on the west side, thus splitting Wausau East and Wausau West. So not all of this gets necessarily adopted, but there are a lot of really interesting things, like, I don't know, plan for public water facilities. That is not something that I don't know what to make of this, but it's really cool that it exists. It's super detailed. It's kind of inscrutable in a way, in part because of the specific nature of what they're studying. It's also kind of hard to tell a story when you just have black and white with some red. There's not color in here. It's just red and black and white. This yellow bit up here is just something with like a colored pencil that they added in that particular copy. So as a result, it's kind of hard to make things, today this wouldn't be a particularly effective graph, but for 1965, it's pretty cool. All sorts of other, tables, graphs, page after page of data that they collected for this. It's a pretty cool resource, all in all. But let's talk about the transportation plan. That's what we're getting into here. So as they say here, the most important factor in the future growth of the Wausau area will be the availability of adequate facilities to serve the transportation needs of the people. Not only will it be essential that the Wausau area be closely linked through an effective transportation system with major metropolitan centers as Chicago, Detroit, and Minneapolis-St. Paul, but also that adequate facilities be available so that the Wausau area can continue to function as a regional center serving north central Wisconsin. And they go on and talk about all of these things. It's a component of intercity bus service. It's about the railroad. It's about the airport. And it's about the increasing importance of automobiles. So getting back to this is that traffic. Again, this is a great example of, it's not the most effective because they can't have multiple colors. They just have to make the line thicker, as you can see here, vehicles per day. So it kind of works, but it's not the most exact. But you get the idea. At this point, it's interesting. So we have the highway bypass. Business 51 is no longer 51. It's Business 51. But U.S. Highway Business 51 is a bypass on the west side. So that's taking some of the strain of the traffic that was there in the early 50s. But there's still a lot of people using Grand Avenue, a lot of traffic in the downtown areas, and you can see a lot of people crossing each of the three bridges. So what do they make of this? Well, we have to talk a little bit about that Beltway. The Beltway is an interesting concept that really takes over in the 1950s. After World War II, big push to have this freeway system, interstates, and state highways. And so they start to do these massive construction projects to build these cloverleaf interchanges. This one's down in Madison, but as it says, we'll have 200 of these across the state, and there are 17 currently being built. As that comes through, again, this is great because it means that the traffic that has been going through, you know, Grand Avenue, and then up, you know, along Merrill Avenue up here, if you wanted to get to Merrill, for example, you don't have to go through downtown Wausau anymore. And that's great, right? That is ideal. It also means, this is from 1960, or 62, somewhere in there, before it, like you can see the dotted line of the proposal on the left side here of the new highway system. While that's going to take the strain away from the downtown area, it also means that people are not going to be driving through, say, Grand Avenue. So all those people, you know, the burger joints, the gas stations, the shops that maybe help having people travel through, that's going to be not a thing. That's not going to mean that people aren't going to come to Wausau in order to do their shopping, for example, but it means that we want to make sure that the process of getting off the highway system and getting to downtown Wausau is as barrier-free as possible. We don't want people to blame the traffic to go do their business in Stevens Point or Wisconsin Rapids or Marshfield or, you know, someplace else in the area. So part of the proposals here have to do with streamlining the process of getting people off of the highway and getting them downtown Wausau in a more streamlined process so that we don't have people, you know, traffic jams being created. They also weren't just thinking about what it's like in 1965. They wanted to see what it would look like in 20 years. And this is, again, fascinating to look at. This is the population distribution, what they envision Wausau and the Wausau area to look like in 1985. Now, are they correct? Probably not. They probably made the best guess they could. They don't, for example, envision the mall being built. So, you know, things like looking at traffic, which is what they're doing on this side, looking at basically using this information to figure out what's the strain on the roads going to be, and then, you know, streamlining that process. Again, we're creating proposals for how we're going to deal with traffic, not just right now, but looking in the future 20, 30 years down the road. And that brings us to this, the central traffic circulation. Not only do we have the one-way streets that have been created along the Wisconsin River, we also are envisioning a grander system of one-way streets that will, these loops, these interchanging loops. So in blue, it's going clockwise, taking traffic clockwise, and in red, going counterclockwise. And these loops will lead to people, again, one-way streets. It's a much more streamlined process. You don't have to worry about cross traffic. And so by creating these loops, the idea was then we can funnel traffic away from the side streets, make it a little safer to walk on them, right? Make it clearer so that people know where they're going. I mean, it's still confusing because of the one-ways not being everywhere, but like, it's a better idea is what the intention here is. And so, yeah, they adopt it. They consider it for a while. This is after 1965, after the proposal was put out as part of this. You know, again, there's pushback, divided reaction. And to be clear, like, not all of these one-ways come into being exactly as they are proposed in 1965, but many of them do. And there's going to be further expansions as well. So by 1968, they established the one-ways that are effective of October 15th. And again, it's not exactly what they proposed in this, but it's pretty dang close. So that, over the course of half an hour, I guess, is how we came to have the one-ways in Wausau. Again, there's sort of back and forth. Is this a good thing or bad thing? But even here in 1978, this is just a general roadmap. You know, let's make those arrows so that people understand that there are one-way traffic here. It does make it kind of complicated for people who are not familiar. Like, if you know where you're going, it's fine. But learning the ropes, This is what I mean when I say that, like, I don't know if this is more one-way street than most cities have. But I do know that the one-way streets that we have are pretty prominent, and that becomes part of the identity of what's going on. Now, will that always be the case? I don't know. This is the downtown area. This is some plans for the former mall site, as I found on the greaterwausau.org, kind of going through that process. They envision some two-way streets, taking some of those one-way streets and making them two. This has been a thing that we've been talking about for years. Back before the pandemic in 2018, 2019, there were plans in place to try to phase out some of the one-ways to make it a little bit more accessible. And there are a lot more, I think there's some justified reasons why people might want to move away from them. I should clarify, I should have said this at the beginning. I am not a city planner. This is just me looking at the records and trying to understand them and just trying to communicate what's happened in the past. I couldn't tell you whether one-way streets are actually good for traffic in sort of the modern understanding of that or not. What I do know is it seems to be sort of more accepted that, one-way streets were established really to benefit people with automobiles. And everybody had to have an automobile in the 1960s. That's how you got around. Is that what we want for our downtown area today? Maybe not. And so I think that the discussion does make a lot of sense. And in the meantime, for better or worse, this is one of the very first posts of the Facebook group, if you're for Wausau, back when it was formatted as an actual, continuation of that thought. You remember downtown was all one ways. That's an exaggeration, but, it is part of the identity of like, what's the Wausau area, right? We have a lot of one-ways, whether you like them or not. That's kind of interesting to see how that all came to be. So that concludes the first week of our March MAPness series. Yeah, it's a fun one to put together, I would say. There's some more fun stuff coming up. Next week, Gary Gisselman will be back to talk about not just one map, but a whole book of maps, something called an atlas. Specifically some historical atlas, looking at some maps and saying, what does that mean about Marathon County? Yeah, more stuff to come over the course of the next few weeks. Yeah. Thanks for watching. Again, also have some History Speaks coming up as well. Not this weekend, but next weekend. So tune in or come on over for that if you're interested. Yeah, I think that kind of concludes it. I haven't done this for a while. I'm gonna check to see if there's comments. Why not, right? I guess in the meantime, thanks for watching. Just see if no comments. That's all right. Hey, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and we'll see you next time for some more history chats.